I'll introduce to you a little bit about that inner critic and what can we do to quiet that inner critic, because if it gets too much out of control, that's when problems begin. And unfortunately, for many of us, we're not aware of that inner critic, and we listen to everything that that voice in our head says to us. We start identifying with that voice. And eventually, if that voice is too negative, then it becomes part of our identity, that negative identity that we begin to adopt. The other thing that we can also know about the critic is that it's actually known as the ego. So I'm sure many of you have heard from either psychology classes or from spiritual books, you know, from many different sources, that there's this thing within us called the shadow self, as Carl Jung has explained it, called the ego. And it's a natural and normal part of the human psyche. It's absolutely not the enemy, but something that we can learn to live with and not something we need to get rid of. We actually cannot control the ego. We cannot control this inner critic, because ego is something that's like the shadow. You know, it follows us everywhere we go, right? Because without the light, there cannot be darkness. Without darkness, there cannot be light. So the same thing with us. There's the inner self, and then there's the shadow self. And that is that inner critic. So everywhere we go, this inner critic follows us. We cannot control it, but what we can do is learn to observe it and become aware of it. And I'll talk in a little while about how we can start doing that. But first, you just need to understand that you need to stop identifying with every single thing that you hear in your mind, because those things that you hear in your mind, they could be things that you might have heard as a child from your parents, from your school teachers, from the media, from society, from religion, any authority figure, or anybody that you really grew up around listening to and looking up to. That kind of forms part of that identity, part of that voice that we hear. And isn't it interesting? I don't know if any of you have ever observed it, but when you hear that inner voice that tells you, oh, you shouldn't be doing that, or I don't think you're going to pull this off, or you're not good enough, or this is just wrong. You shouldn't be doing this because it's not correct, or it's not polite, or it's not what good girls do. Have you ever noticed and observed that that inner critic actually sounds a lot like one of the people from your life? Because I know that sometimes when I do things that I have decided on doing, for instance, let's say I want to get a tattoo. I'm turning 40 years old. It was kind of going to be like a gift for myself and to celebrate my 40th birthday this year. So I was thinking of getting a tattoo, a little one on an ankle, something very classy and elegant. And yet in the back of my mind, I'm hearing this voice that says, tattoo? Are you serious? This is not what proper girls do. You're going to look ridiculous. Absolutely not. What kind of thinking is this? Stop thinking like that. No, you're not getting a tattoo. And guess who that voice sounds like? It sounds an awful lot like my mother. And, we might have different voices in our heads. It could be a school teacher, or it could be a parent, or an authority figure that you grew up listening to. It could be a beloved character from a TV show. Who knows? Like, it could be absolutely anybody that you have looked up to and whose opinion you valued a lot, especially as you were growing up as a child or as an adolescent. And so start to observe, who is that voice sounding like? Because if that voice sounds a lot like a parent or somebody in your life that has always had a little bit too much control over you in your life, then you have to start identifying it for what it is. It's not really you that is speaking. It's really that conditioned tape recorder that's been playing and programmed in the back of your mind for probably your entire life. And so you need to start observing it, becoming aware for what it is, and stop identifying it as yourself. Because you yourself are not your thoughts. You yourself are a timeless, formless presence. You're this beautiful being. You're a spirit, you're a soul that is made of love, and the underlying essence of you is peace, love, and joy. And everything else that you hear in the background, kind of like as a voice, that is not you. That is just that shadow self that is made up of everything that you've ever heard, seen, and experienced in your life, and everything that some other people have made you to believe. So yes, it's everything that we have seen in the culture, maybe in movies. Um, so let's talk about, what does this ego actually do to us? It actually tries to protect us. It doesn't have bad intentions. It actually has good intentions, because since the beginning of time, the ego and our brains have evolved in a way that keep us safe, that make us take stock of risk and assess that risk and see, is it safe to continue doing something? So it actually tries to keep us from getting hurt, embarrassed, rejected, from failing, because for the ego, the worst possible thing in the world is failure, is death, it's embarrassment. Whenever we get even a chance of getting embarrassed or rejected, it almost, for the ego, it seems like it's the worst thing possible. It's just like death. So it will do everything possible to stop us from making that step, taking that action, taking that risk. It'll always try to talk us out of it. It'll make us believe these negative things about yourself. You're not good enough to go for that, to ask for that promotion. What experience do you have? They're going to reject you. Don't even bother, right? You want to become a best-selling author. Who do you think you are? You're not a native speaker of English language. This is, by the way, my own self-critic talking, okay? You're not a native speaker of English language. What makes you think you're going to get that best-selling title? The New York Times bestselling. Everyone that you have ever read has been either a doctor or, has some kind of degree in psychology or something like that. What makes you think that you're going to get that title? So it actually tells us these things because it wants to prevent us from taking that risk and potentially getting rejected. So in essence, it ends up leading us to either inaction, right? So we might take complete inaction on our goals, on the things that we want to do, or it might lead us to perfectionism, on the other hand, because the inner critic is always saying that you're not good enough, you need to do more, you need to do more, you need to continue striving to become better, better, and better, because you're never good enough. And it may lead to perfectionism. And of course, inadvertently, it also leads to comparison and having us look at other people and saying, well, you see, look, this person is doing it, but probably because they had better upbringing, or they have a better position because of their race, because of the color of their skin, because of whatever it is that their mind might think, right? So this person is doing it, but I cannot because I'm not in the same situation as that person. And, it contributes to a lot of self-judgment and self-criticism. And how often do you listen to that critic? Most of the time, we tend to identify with everything that we hear in our minds. But we need to start learning how to get out of that identification with the inner critic. So what can we do? Well, first of all, you need to not criticize that critic. You don't need to hate that critic, because as anything, whenever you try to use force against something, whenever you resist something, it always persists, right? So whenever we try to reject that critic and say, you are just, I can't believe how awful this critic is, I hate it, it's in my way, I need to get rid of it, then it's just going to come back even stronger, right? It has a way of finding another doorway to try to come back and get you from another direction. So what you need to do is actually make peace with it. Actually send love to the inner critic and say, you know what, I love you anyway. Even though you criticize me, and even though you say sometimes negative things and you make me want to believe negative things about myself, I love that part of myself anyway, right? So just mentally set an intention that you're going to send love even to that critic, and actually say, I know you're just trying to protect me. This is you having a conversation with yourself in your mind. I know you're just trying to protect me, but I don't need to listen to you, because I know that I am on the inside this timeless and this limitless and this powerful being that can achieve absolutely anything. And that is a fact. You know, you have seen it firsthand from your role models, from the people that you admire. The things that they have achieved, they haven't achieved because they're better than you in some way. They achieved them because they believed that they could. It's all in that mindset. They didn't listen to their critic, and they went ahead and they did it anyway. And that's where you have to start making that distinction, that inner critic, and then there's me, the real me, the one that's listening to all of this, the one that's aware of all of this chatter, all of that noise that's going on in the mind. And the best way that you can start doing that is, of course, by practicing mindfulness, practicing meditation, breath work, any kind of moments of stillness where you can actually sit down and be with yourself. And in a lot of my courses, if any of you have taken it, you will remember that I always talk about how to become present, how to become aware of your body, of your breath, because through the body and the breath, you will get into the present moment. Nothing in your mind is present. The mind can only think about the past or project into the future. So what is the only thing that is true and real and present about you at any given moment? It's your body and your breath. So that is the gateway through which you can get into that present moment. That is what is called staying grounded, staying present, being in the now. I'm sure all of you have read the books and you have heard about all of this being in the present moment, living in the present. But what does that really mean? So I'm sure that if you haven't tried meditation, if you haven't tried any of these spiritual practices, it might be difficult to get into the present moment because you're so identified with everything that you're hearing in your thoughts. But the moment you start practicing these mindfulness techniques, the ones that I teach, like breath work, observing your mind, doing some analytical meditation, doing body awareness, or like a body scan, that's when you start becoming present, and that's when you start to make that distinction. There's that presence, there's that consciousness that's inside of me, that's my true essence. And there are the thoughts passing by, just like clouds, just like waves. I cannot control them. The only thing I can do is observe them and watch them pass. So that's when, the more you get into this kind of mindfulness, that's when you start getting really good at making that distinction. And also you can start developing your intuition, that incredible voice that's also your inner guide, but it doesn't come in a form of thoughts. It comes as feelings. It kind of something that's hard to explain, but I'm sure many of you have heard, I have an intuition. I have a feeling that this person might not be good for me, or this situation is not good for me. When you need to make a decision, you start listening to your intuition and making that decision from that gut, right? That gut feeling. That's when you know when you're finally listening to your inner guide, inner goddess, right? Your inner child, instead of listening to the inner critic. So one recommendation before I wrap this up, I just want to tell you, continue practicing your mindfulness, your breath work, do yoga, go out in nature, surround yourself by nature, because in nature, you'll find that stillness. And also surround yourself by confident and positive people, because those are the people that will also form part of your inner dialogue. And if you surround yourself by these positive and confident people, then your inner dialogue is slowly going to start improving and becoming just like that of those people. So I would like to just leave a few moments for any questions before I end. I know this might be a lot of information and this might seem like, oh my goodness, where do I begin? But just start by giving yourself time with yourself, even just 5 minutes per day. When you can just sit alone and do nothing. I mean, how often do we do that? How often do we just allow ourselves to put down the phone and just sit and listen? Whether your eyes are closed or not, whether you're sitting in the lotus pose or not, just sit down and listen to yourself and observe what is happening in my mind, what is happening in my heart, what feelings am I going through, what emotions am I experiencing, how do I feel in my body right now? Are there any parts that are tense or tight, or is there pain or discomfort somewhere in my body? Because we hold a lot of our emotions in our body as well. So all of these things are really, really important for you to start to make that distinction. And the moment you become aware of your thoughts, they lose power over you. They don't control you anymore. So this is really, really exciting. And it's the basis of everything that I teach. Even when I teach the pageant courses, Win the Crown, I always talk about this part, because you cannot be a winner in your life. You cannot be a winner in your pageant or in your love life if you are too identified with your own mind. You need to start looking for that inner essence, the true you, that's with, it's the thing that makes you authentic and genuine. And that's the thing that helps you to live your most authentic and genuine life.